I would now like to call Rhianon and Andrada. And Rhianon and Andrada will talk about DIGICOR. So why, who, and what is DIGICOR? Rhianon, I did not introduce yourself. Do you mind Do you mind introducing yourself and then Andrada, please?
Yep, sure. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us here at this final multiplier event for the DIGICOR project. It's really great to be here with everyone today. My name is Rhianon, and I work for the Bremen Ministry of Justice and Constitution, and we have the good fortune to coordinate the DIGICOR project. And we are here with the 5 partners from this project. So we're all represented in the room today. So please grab any one of us and find out about the project and about how it was implemented in each of the countries. It's really interesting take on these Erasmus Plus projects. And over to Andrada.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Andrada Istrate. I'm a sociologist working with European Strategies Consulting, which is the Romanian partner in this project. I'm a researcher. I've been doing research in corrections for the past 10 years. I'm really excited to talk to you some more about what we've done in DIGICOR so far.
Yeah, so and I must say, thanks to Simon, the first slide has been completely done. So we've no need to go into the whys and wherefores about the background of the DIGICOR project. It does respond to the challenges presented by COVID. So we, as organisations, I'm sorry if my voice cuts out at various points, really saw, we are Ministries of Justice, we are prisons, we are researchers within the partnership of DIGICOR, so we really saw on the ground immediately how things changed during the pandemic, and we wanted to capitalise on the good stuff, basically, on what was happening and the momentum that it was bringing into prisons to bring new technological solutions to old problems. It was a critical turning point for all of the partners within the project, but we also wanted to claw in other experiences from wider organisations around the project and to sift all this practice and to see if there was anything transferable. I think I would add to your list of one of the things that corrections is not particularly good at is picking up the good stuff, making this information easy and accessible to other prison managers and prison administrations and allowing them to soak up what other people have learned. I mean, I think there's only improvement on that front. And so this was, DIGICOR, is a response to that improvement. And I think perhaps, so IPS developed the project, and I think perhaps you anticipated even at that point, it was developed in 2019, that momentum would be lost, so perhaps this could support, DIGICOR could support as an engine to try and keep the good practice at least known about and perhaps transferred into other situations. It is fundamentally a staff training project, and we have been sponsored by the Erasmus Plus, a national agency in Germany. And we're actually sponsored by the vocational training side of Erasmus Plus, which is a bit different to our normal route, which means we are really looking at the staff members and seeing what it is that they need to know in order to support better rehabilitation, back to rehabilitation, through digital technologies. Our partners are IPS developer. The Bremen Ministry of Justice is the coordinator. The Federal Public Service Department of Justice, represented today by Patrick, is also here, and they're every partner, as you'll notice, has a really different stance on the way they already used technology before the pandemic, and so different stuff to bring into the project. European Strategies Consulting from Romania, DGRSP from Portugal, and the CAHEM Training Centre, represented to the front line. and as I say, come talk to any of us during the course of the 1.5 days. We'd be pleased to talk to you. It runs for 2 years until the end of this month, and we will be wrapping up at the end of April. So, how did we begin the project? And I'm going to hand over to Andrada to talk about the information gathering side of it.
Okay, so we started the project with a state-of-the-art analysis. What we did is that we went through the scientific and gray literature published in the last 5 years. We thought that 5 years would be a reasonable time frame to have, especially when you're researching technology, because you know that's the fast-paced rate of, it's a fast pace of development. And what we did is that we constructed a sort of inventory of digital technologies available in corrections. We started from the easier, perhaps the very important ones on inmate telecommunication technology, that is phones, in-cell phones, video calls, and video visitation. We went on to video conferencing with courts, and then e-learning and other forms of correctional education, telemedicines, of course, devices, like kiosks, as you mentioned before, in-cell devices and tablets, electronic monitoring and tracking technologies, and telephone supervision, because we have, when we talk about corrections, we cannot only talk about prison, we have to talk also about probation, and also other rehabilitative programs. What we saw is that these technologies have had various degrees of success. For instance, video conferencing was one of the measures proposed by the European e-Justice Plan, and is implemented with various degrees of success in different countries. In Romania, for instance, it was one of the measures that existed, and but it was similarly to other EU countries. Its use was exacerbated during the COVID period. Yeah. So maybe it would be a good time for Rhianon to talk about the digital scenarios.
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay, so after we had gathered all the literature, I'm going to say this quietly so that you don't hear. We then knew that we had to put it into a format when people would actually look at it who might use it. So we wanted to show prison governors, prison administrators, people who work as officers, what it would actually look like to implement the kind of stuff that works for digital rehabilitation within their own prisons. So the idea was to develop these scenarios, literally describing implementation as it has been in 1 or 2 prisons, so that with the aim that anybody reading it could really quickly and easily pull out, yeah, okay, that would work on this station in my prison, or, you know, this and this would work, or we've got the infrastructure to implement that, or without too much problem. So it's a quick reference guide, and very easily accessible, and aimed, as Andrada says, not just to prison, but also to liberation. We went through the scenarios as they were sort of popularized by the literature review that we'd done. We looked at the modern prison organization, at digital sentence planning and support, at e-learning, the e-learning implemented with prisoners, not necessarily with staff, and how we supported broader basic education in prison, and just raising the baseline digital literacy for prisoners as well. And also access to higher education where that was applicable. I mean, in many prisons you don't really get to move on to that. But where it was available and used, we looked at it. And the aim was, in these scenarios, then for each of the partners to choose one to visualize whether it had been done or if it would be implemented as a pilot in their prison, and to reflect on the kind of challenges that they would have during implementation, to visualize it really on a local level. Who would implement? How many staff do I need? What kind of experience these staff need? Who do I need in my team? Which stakeholders? How do I prepare them? And then to test and implement on the ground, which we will go into tomorrow. But as everyone knows who's implemented a pilot, it is slightly harder to do than you at once imagine it's going to be. So, but fundamentally, all these DIGICOR scenarios have been collated for your reference and for your colleagues' reference on this website link here, translated into all the partner languages. So please do share them if you think that they're useful and a good way to communicate some good and transferable learning from the COVID period. The next step in DIGICOR was to develop a kind of competence profile for people working within prisons with inmates, but also in the administrative side. What is it that they need to know in order to, or to be able to do in order to implement the kind of scenarios that we have developed? You know, what basic skills do they need, and how can we support their readiness to take up change? We used a couple of baseline documents, one of which was the Council of Europe Guidelines for Recruitment and Retention of Staff, and another was the European Commission Guides to digital competencies. That's also online. Please take a look. And all that brought us to the point where we were able to develop a modular training curriculum. It's really important to focus on the word modular, particularly here, because some of what you can see on the slide is going to be very basic for people. Some is a fundamental learning that all staff members need to have. Some are just modules that people working with inmates are going to need. Other stuff is going to be more interesting to different parts of the prison, for example, telemedicine. But taken as a whole, as you can see, we've tried to move through all the really fundamental information that you need in order to understand why technology supports, rehabilitation supports the mission of the prison, to how it can do that without focusing too much on the technology that you use, but also making the social case, and perhaps even the business case, for why it's effective to move in a certain direction. At the end, we've provided a Train the Trainer course. This is in the knowledge that this probably won't go into the basic curriculum for all prison staff straight away. So it will probably be passed on to staff within prison by somebody else who's already done the training. So we've given a quick course on how to do that, how to build your groups together, so that you have somebody in the room who's more experienced, perhaps mentoring and supporting people who don't have the experience, and perhaps mentoring colleagues who really don't see the point in moving onto a tablet or don't really recognize the benefits for their institute. So there's lots of different ways to support that. Yeah, passing. No, you can do it. Passing on.
I feel like we're in a band. I like this. Yeah. So the final part of our presentation, of our project, includes policy recommendation. We try to follow several principles when devising policy recommendations. The first principle was to involve all stakeholders, and I'll talk immediately about them. The second one was that all recommendations should be strategy-driven, needs-focused, and evidence-based, of course. So what we did was that we departed from the literature, as we mentioned before, in order to identify the key stakeholders for digital technologies in correction. That would be prison staff, prison administration and prisoners, of course, probation counselors and clients, and national and European stakeholders. We had a few engagement hubs throughout the project and peer review hubs, and our participants assisted us in identifying other stakeholders, and that would be prison schools, training providers and NGOs, local administrations, councils, mayoral offices, and obviously university researchers and other evaluation providers. What I'm going to do now is go through the recommendations. I will try not to take up a lot of time, because I know it's very annoying to be the presenter before the coffee break or the lunch. So I'm going to go very quickly through our recommendations. But I'm happy, all of us were really happy to discuss about DIGICOR. So let's talk. First of all, the recommendations for prisoners, it departs from like this very simple principle that access to ICT in prison may normalize technology and ensure that inmates are not digitally excluded upon release. So in order to do that, we thought that prisons should provide basic ITC training for digitally illiterate prisoners, and to provide access to digital communication for them. To involve families in how digital communication could be used more effectively. To offer training for prisoners, because when you talk about access, we don't talk always about or only about infrastructure, but also about the knowledge on how to use digital technologies, educational programs and resources, and to ensure that technology is used to better prepare prisoners for prison release. For our recommendations for prison staff and administration would be to, and this is also based on not only the literature that we reviewed, but also on the short-term staff training that we had in Bremen and in Ghent, is that it's very important. We found out that it's very important to include digital skills in the curricula for prison and probation officers, and that digital training should always be tailored to the needs of prison officer, reintegration staff, and administration. Obviously, there are different types of staff who do not use the same technology. They use different platforms, and they shouldn't be trained in gaining a sort of knowledge that they don't use. Digital training and e-learning should be interactive and engaging. Trainees should receive ongoing support, either through a help desk or a mentoring program. And I think one of the most important things, for me at least, was the way we look at digital training. And we propose that we see it as a continuous process, because technology is changing all the time, and this is why we have to change the training content as well. As I mentioned before, our recommendations are centered around conducting needs analysis, and that are at the basis of a vision and the long-term digitalization strategy. Obviously, each measure that you would want to implement should be accompanied by an evaluation mechanism to see if what you did makes sense in your setting. Another thing would be to involve prison and probation staff in creating goals for digitalization, and to address the concerns and fears of prison staff. And this once again stresses the need for change management. our recommendations for probation counselors and clients. One of the most interesting things that we saw in the literature review is that prison services should allow for greater flexibility in incorporating hybrid or blended practices. And when we talk about flexibility, it doesn't mean that probation should go remote all the way, but that probation counselors could establish a relationship face-to-face, but maintain it online. So we promote heavily remote supervision. That is always a good balance of supervision and support. Another recommendation would be to digitize programs and access to treatment services and programs, especially for people who don't have easy access to programs. And lastly, there are our recommendations for national and European stakeholders are very much in line with what I mentioned before. It's that digitalization should be driven by a vision, principle, and standards. We support the need for conducting research and evaluation within corrections. To involve as many stakeholders as possible. So I would stop here and give the word to Rhianon if she has anything to add on this. No. Otherwise, thank you, and we'll talk more now and during the break, of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rhianon. Thank you, Andrada. I don't know if any of the colleagues has any question about the DIGICOR or wants to comment on any of the recommendations that Andrada just presented. Yeah, Simon, please.
Thanks for this, and I think a lot of what you've said kind of dovetails quite nicely with what I had to say. And I guess I'll ask you the question that I asked Dr. Alexandra Walker in Colorado with implementation. Your recommendations, I think, make a lot of sense. How do we ensure that they're actually adopted? How do we drive? Because a lot of it's common sense, and I think probably similar things have been said before. My experience is that it isn't necessarily always embraced. How do we take these? How do we move our sector forward to actually embrace and put into practice some of the recommendations that you've highlighted here?
I think in a way that's one of the key questions, and who has a mandate to implement this sort of digitalization strategy, and I think it's a very complicated discussion in itself. One easy way would be to start top down, but I think every sort of technological implementation that we want to do has to bear in mind the specific needs of the institution where we want to implement it. So that would be like the first important point. If you want to add to that.
Yeah, that was the first thing we talked about. I mean, who's going to look at recommendations like this? Mm-hmm. And that was why we split the recommendations up into our different stakeholder groups, with the knowledge that these would probably be read alongside some kind of e-learning course or pilot implementation, so that perhaps people who are, I'm not saying this is actually the case, but perhaps people who are implementing a new digital strategy on the ground and are seeing a couple of benefits, and then read a list of recommendations directed at staff members saying, these are the things that could happen, and we already know that, can take that bit of paper a little bit higher up and use it as a support for them to say, okay, this is what we need, this will help our job, and this will help us be more efficient and effective. That was what we have tried to do. Let's see. We are really only at the beginning phase of trying to push this through. And I can only see that we'll be able to see benefits in the countries that we've actually implemented the project.
May I add something to that? Because I think that would be an interesting discussion for all of us throughout these days as well. Is how do we bring the message? as Andrada said, well, a top-down approach would be interesting. Even that, we know that when it comes to corrections, we have the Council of Europe that issues recommendations, and the member states may or may not take into account those recommendations. And so, but even when they don't take into account the recommendations formally, they look at them and they try to understand what they mean. So, and that's something interesting and relevant of that top-down approach, which when it comes to the European context. But then the other point, and that's one of the main objectives of DIGICOR, is really raising awareness. So if we can create and make the buzz around what we are doing and get the attention of jurisdictions and practitioners, and that's very much what we've been doing, and then that we'll continue to do in the next 2 years as well, with some sort of continuation of this initiative. Then, as Rhianon said, probably some of the people that really want to implement something, they can take these recommendations up and see this is the way to do it. I fully endorse that. So, but again, I think it's a very interesting discussion for us to think about. Is how do we do that? How would you do it in Canada? Probably
not very well.
But it will be different in any country, right? But you know, coming back to my opening remarks, sometimes people still see digital as being an IT issue, and that's really part of the question here, right? So if we have the IT people coming to the executives and say, you know, this is what we should look at, or you should look at, probably we are already moving one step. Definitely, we are moving one step further. So, on the other hand, if we have some in Europe, institutions like the Council of Europe or the Commission saying this is relevant, it's already influencing decision makers as well. So we have to work on these different fronts. Güven.
Maybe I can also add some experiences from Turkey. I mean, before pandemic, we have some small initiatives that those are aiming to improve our capacity on e-learning activities. With the inception of COVID pandemic, it was a kind of forcing motive for us to improve our staff training issues throughout this process. It was a difficult one. We have done many things as to provide informative or training material to our staff throughout this process. We have done many things, but we don't have guidelines in practitioner level. I mean, those, how to say, I mean, there is a gap between high-level decision makers and the practitioners. I mean, those in the level, in the front line, in our general directorate, where we have been performing many activities on e-learning issues or other, I mean, digitalization process. But, I mean, with those guidelines, it is easy to provide a kind of, I mean, motive for decision makers to enhance their understanding easily with a, I mean, a kind of comprehensive way. So it will provide a kind of, I mean, textbook for us. Also, not for high-level decision makers, but also for practitioners. So we are in a kind of cave to see the light. I mean, those, from my point of view, are lights for the future.
Thank you very much, Güven. Because I think what you, not only the recommendation, but also the scenarios are really important in that respect. So when we started the project and we had, discussions, even in the framework of other initiatives on staff training, and we would ask the correctional officers, what are the technologies that you see that are relevant in prison? And I remember a particular discussion in this country where we are now, and some of the officers would say, well, it's CCTV and radio. That was like the technology that people could immediately relate to prison. It was CCTV and radio. That goes quite back a few decades, right, when we think about that. So modern technology is something that is already back a few decades. And when we started to engage in the discussions about what kind of other technologies do you know that could be used in prisons to improve your operation, so it was not an easy conversation. It was a difficult conversation because people are used to, as you said, to work in their own context. You used the metaphor that they are in the cave and cannot see the light. Mm-hmm. But in fact, when people are working in institutions, and if they don't move to other institutions or go to other countries or see what's going on in other realities, in fact, they are in their own cave. So they can only see what happens in that institution. So I think that looking at the different scenarios, what we try to do is to say, what is the benefit of this? So what is this technology? What is this? Why is it important? Secondly, what is the benefit that it brings to the prison administration? But also, what is the benefit that it brings to the inmate and to the prison officer? So bringing that so that people can understand that is like when Simon was saying, well, the use of tablets or some delivery of some services through digital technologies and through device, that's not a gift. It's not a toy to the inmate. It's really bringing a lot of benefit and advantages to the administration and to the officers as well. So it's really important that people understand that. Otherwise, as you said, we only know what we know, right? And if we don't see outside our cave, we'll only know that reality. So I think it's really important, not only the recommendations, but also the scenarios and the different materials to that perspective. Yeah, great. Thank you so much.